They thought she was just another underqualified hire. They didn't know they were mocking the woman who owned the building. When 39-year-old Brielle Landry went undercover at her own luxury dealership, she uncovered something far worse than poor sales. A culture built on judgment, entitlement, and quiet discrimination. What she did next. It didn't just shock her staff. It sent a message across the entire industry. One that proves respect isn't optional, and leadership means crushing the problem before it crushes your brand. The humidity wrapped around her like a warning. It was just past 9 a.m. in Dallas, Texas, and the air already felt thick with heat and something else attention. Brielle Landry sat in the driver's seat of a dented Ford Fusion, parked across the street from her own dealership, Landry Prestige Auto. She wasn't here to celebrate the company's 10th year in business. She was here because something was broken. At 39, Brielle wasn't your typical executive. No inherited fortune, no fast-track MBA, just grit, long nights, and a dream that started with flipping trade-ins from auctions on weekends. What began in a leased warehouse had grown into 3 thriving luxury dealerships across the state. Mercedes, Audis, Escalades. Her name was stitched into the business-like thread in custom leather seats. And lately, that name had been dragging through the dirt. It started with whispers, complaints brushed aside by middle managers, a few upset customers here, a couple of returned vehicles there. But something didn't sit right with her. The way the complaints were dismissed, the lack of urgency, the excuses about bad fits and flaky buyers. She'd been around long enough to recognize the signs. This wasn't a dip. It was rot. She'd seen it before in other companies, in boardrooms, in industries where power went unchecked. Somewhere between growth and comfort, teams stopped being held accountable. Entitlement replaced hunger. People forgot what it meant to serve. That kind of complacency wasn't just bad for business. It was a breeding ground for something worse: bias, disrespect, and quiet exclusion. So Brielle made a decision. If no one else was going to bring her the truth, she'd go get it herself. That morning, she stepped out of the car, not as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, but as a new recruit named Brie. She wore faded jeans, a plain gray tee, and an old pair of Nikes. No makeup, no jewelry. Her long black hair was pulled back into a basic ponytail. She left her usual Vehiclia sleek black Tesla in her garage and rented the Fusion for the day. She even swapped out her designer wallet for a $10 knockoff from a gas station rack. People make assumptions based on appearance. That was the whole point. She wanted to feel itto, see how it felt to walk in invisible. Not because of skill or talent or background, but because of how you looked, or didn't. As she approached the sliding glass doors of Landry Prestige's flagship location, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wasn't scared. She was ready. Because what she feared more than confrontation was losing control of what she had built, watching it slip into something that stood for exclusion rather than excellence. Inside, the dealership looked like a luxury hotel lobby. Polished marble floors, spotless glass cases, plush seating for high-net-worth clients. The smell of leather, ozone, and espresso hung in the air. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt foreign, cold. The receptionist barely looked up as Brielle walked in. A sales rep in a tight navy suit clocked her attire, raised a brow, and went back to his tablet. No greeting, no warmth, just a flash of judgment. A flicker of disdain. It started instantly. She had planned to observe, to take mental notes, but the emotional impact hit her harder than expected. Every dismissive glance, every scoff, every "just wait over there" when customers arrived and she wasn't allowed to help. It chipped away at something deeper. These weren't just bad habits. These were learned behaviors, reinforced by a culture that rewarded performance, not professionalism. Sales numbers over service. Flash over fundamentals. By noon, she'd seen enough to know the problem wasn't a few rogue personalities. It was a system, one that punished difference and propped up arrogance, one that assumed the richest-looking person in the room had the right to be there and everyone else needed to prove themselves, again and again. And in a place that sold aspiration for a living, that bias became policy without anyone needing to say it aloud. But Brielle wasn't here to complain. She was here to confront. Not just the employees who had forgotten how to treat people, but the culture that made them think it was okay. This wasn't a social experiment. It was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. Brielle Landry settled into the battered gray swivel chair tucked behind a corner desk near the service bay entrance. It was a dead zone far from the gleaming showroom, invisible to the casual eye. That was no accident. When the sales manager, Vince Holloway, assigned her there with barely a glance, it was clear he didn't expect much from her. "Just observe for now," he mumbled, thrusting a stained, outdated sales manual into her hands before retreating to his glass office. The door clicked shut behind him, isolating him from the real work of the dealership and the problems festering beneath its surface. Brielle flipped open the manual and pretended to read, but her eyes stayed sharp. She wasn't looking for typos or sales tips. She was watching, listening. And what she found was worse than she feared. Across the floor, the sales team gathered in loose-packed shiny watches flashing under the fluorescent lights, laughing too loud, speaking too carelessly. Conversations floated through the air thick with arrogance. "She won't last the week," sneered a woman with perfectly manicured nails and a tight bun. Her badge said Lana. "Look at that outfit," a younger guy named Corey added, smirking. "Bet she rode in on a bus." Near the coffee station, two senior reps owned older, with thinning hair. The other built like a linebacker leaned against the counter like they owned the place. They exchanged stories about problem customers who dared to ask too many questions or didn't look the part of luxury buyers. "We should start charging admission," one joked. "Let the peasants window shop, then show them the door." Brielle's stomach turned. She wasn't naive about sales culture. Pressure and competition could turn even good people into sharks. But this wasn't just cutthroat ambition. It was disdain weaponized entitlement aimed downward at anyone who didn't fit the image they wanted to project. She thought about recent workforce reports she had skimmed on a flight just last month. Disengagement was still rampant. Quiet quitting hadn't vanished, had simply evolved. Employees weren't just working less. They were working without heart, without pride, hollowing out businesses from the inside. It was happening here, too. The signs were everywhere. A young black couple wandered into the lot around midday, peering uncertainly at the lineup of new SUVs. No one moved to greet them. Brielle counted nearly 5 minutes before someone even acknowledged them, a half-hearted wave from across the showroom floor, like shooing away flies. The couple lingered, confused, before drifting back toward their car. No test drive, no sales pitch, no deal. Missed opportunity. Lost revenue. Death by 1,000 cuts. Brielle's chest tightened, not just because it was bad business, but because it mirrored something deeper. The quiet, systemic exclusion that gutted organizations long before lawsuits or scandals ever made headlines. Snap judgments. Implicit bias. A culture where difference was an inconvenience rather than an asset. She thought back to what the sales reps had said earlier, the casual mockery, the dismissal based on nothing more than looks, and she knew this wasn't isolated to Landry Prestige. It was a rot, spreading across industries where leadership took their eyes off the floor and trusted spreadsheets to tell the whole story. Around 2 p.m., Brielle decided to move. She left her assigned desk and wandered toward the main floor, curious to see if proximity made a difference. It didn't. A few glances slid over her like rain on glass. No greetings, no invitations to shadow a tour. Just disinterest masked as professionalism. The real gut punch came when she tried to help. A middle-aged man in a worn mechanic's jacket, probably a business owner, based on the heavy keyring and confident stride, stepped inside, scanning the room. No one approached him. Sensing the opening, Brielle moved forward, offering a polite smile. "Hi there. Looking for anything specific today?" Before the man could respond, Lana materialized like smoke. "We'll take it from here," she said, stepping between them with a tight-lipped grin. The customer blinked, looking slightly startled, but followed Lana toward the new truck lineup without protest. Brielle stood frozen, invisible again. She backed off, returning to the edge of the showroom where a few lower-tier employees milled around a young porter named Darius, wiping fingerprints off chrome, and a receptionist scrolling on her phone behind the service desk. "You'll get used to it," Darius said quietly when he noticed her standing there. "If they don't think you can close 6 figures a month, they don't see you." The words hit harder than he probably intended. Brielle wasn't just seeing bad behavior. She was seeing a culture that had normalized disrespect toward customers, coworkers, anyone outside the narrow definition of success they had built around themselves. It was no wonder turnover rates were climbing across the industry. No wonder customer experience surveys were tanking. Studies had been clear for years. Workplaces without psychological safety, where people feared judgment or dismissal, hemorrhaged not just people but profits. Yet here it was, alive and kicking. By 4 p.m., Brielle's head pounded. She had seen enough to fill a report thicker than a dealership handbook. But the day wasn't over yet. She needed to push deeper. While refilling a paper cup at the break room water cooler, she overheard a conversation that peeled back the final layer. Behind the vending machines, Lana and Corey were chatting with Vince, the sales manager who had shoved the manual at her that morning. "So, what's the deal with the new girl?" Corey asked between sips of coffee. "Another charity case from HR," Vince muttered. "Looks like she wandered out of a bus station. Can't put that in front of a platinum buyer." They laughed, a dry, cutting sound that echoed off the cinder-block walls. "But hey," Vince continued, chuckling, "at least we'll meet our diversity hiring quota." The words slapped Brielle across the face like a blast of cold water. It wasn't just laziness. It wasn't just arrogance. It was systemic rot, codified prejudice hiding behind professionalism, polished floors covering cracked foundations. She felt the old anger boil up, anger she had carried years ago, as a young woman shut out of opportunities because she didn't dress the part, talk the part, or fit the mold. For a moment, Brielle considered storming out, throwing open the doors, pulling off the mask, and unleashing the fury they so richly deserved. But no, that would let them write her off as emotional. Another weak link who couldn't hack it. She needed to do this right. Calculated. Surgical. Unforgettable. The real change wouldn't come from yelling in a break room. It would come from crushing the disease at its root. She walked back onto the showroom floor, shoulders square, head high, her disguise still in place. Across the gleaming marble expanse, Vince leaned in the doorway of his glass-walled office, joking with Corey. Lana was snapping gum and scrolling through her phone, ignoring the few customers still browsing. The dealership looked impressive from the outside. But from where Brielle stood, she could see the truth now. It was a house of mirrors, and it was about to fall. By 5:20 p.m., the dealership started to wind down. A few staff members were checking their phones, trading laughs about happy hour plans. Vince was back in his office, feet kicked up, sipping soda like he'd run a marathon. Lana leaned over a reception counter, twirling her car key lanyard and chatting with Corey, who looked like he hadn't lifted a finger since lunch. Nobody noticed Brielle standing quietly beside the customer lounge, hands clasped in front of her, face unreadable. They still didn't know, but they were about to. She waited until Vince stepped out of his office, clapping once like a coach after a losing game. "All right, team, wrap it up. Good work today. See you tomorrow." His tone was breezy, complacent, the exact reason everything felt so off. That's when Brielle stepped forward, deliberate, calm. One sharp clap of her hand sliced through the fading chatter. Heads turned. "I'd like a moment." At first, no one recognized her. The jeans, the sneakers, the tired face that had blended into the background all day. But something in her voice made the room stop. Vince blinked. Lana tilted her head, confused. Corey straightened like a student caught sleeping in class. "I don't think we've met properly," she said, stepping into the open space between the showroom floor and the gleaming SUV lineup. "My name is Brielle Landry." The silence was instant, heavy. The realization hit like a gut punch. Mouths parted. Eyes widened. Vince took a full step back. Lana's lanyard slipped from her fingers. Corey whispered something under his breath and looked for the nearest exit. Brielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm the founder and owner of Landry Prestige Auto, and today I've been standing in this room watching how you work, how you talk, how you treat people you think don't matter." Her words didn't need theatrics. They landed with the weight of stone. "I built this business from scratch. I've cleaned the oil from garage floors and closed million-dollar contracts without a single investor. I know every inch of this place, from the scent of new leather to the struggle of scraping together payroll in the early days. She paused, turning slightly to face each of them. But what I saw today, what I heard, a breath caught in someone's throat. It was a betrayal. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. She went on. I watched customers real people ignored, judged, and dismissed based on appearance. I heard jokes that mocked them. I heard you mock each other. And I watched leaders those meant to set the tone look the other way. Vince tried to speak, but she held up a hand. Number. You don't get to explain this away. Not today. Her voice softened, but the edge was still there. This company is supposed to represent trust, service, respect. But what I saw today was performance over purpose. Ego over empathy. And that stops now. She turned back toward Vince. You've been managing this location for 3 years. During that time, customer retention has dropped, employee turnover has climbed, and we've seen more lost deals than any other branch. She took a step forward. You didn't just miss the signs, Vince. You were the sign. He looked down at his shoes, suddenly unsure of how to stand. She turned to Lana. Judging people the moment they walk in. Cutting off coworkers because they don't look the part. This isn't luxury sales. It's arrogance in a suit. Lana's cheeks flushed, but she didn't speak. Then Brielle addressed the entire group. Effective immediately. All of you are suspended. You're going home tonight without your commissions, without your titles, and without the assumption that this place will always welcome you back. Gasps rippled across the room. Corey cursed under his breath. A few sales reps stood frozen. One woman quietly put her tablet down on a desk and stepped aside. If you choose to return, Brielle continued, you'll be walking into a different company. He pointed toward the front doors. This building will still have luxury cars, still have polished floors, but the culture, the standard, that's changing. Behind her words was something deeper a truth growing in many businesses across the country. In industries where flashy exteriors masked failing interiors, leaders were being called to do more than delegate. They were being asked to dig in, to confront the culture they'd allowed to grow in their absence. Because without trust, without respect, no brand survived long. And in a hyper-competitive market, customer loyalty wasn't guaranteed. Brielle let the silence sit. Let the discomfort bloom. Because growth only happens in discomfort. This place isn't just about who can afford a 7-figure ride, she said. It's about how we make people feel when they walk through the door. Because every person matters. The woman in sweats. The man in coveralls. The teenager shopping with their grandparent. They're not distractions. They're our purpose. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the new Landry Code of Conduct documents laid out neatly on a desk. Tomorrow morning, if you choose to return, you'll review these. Not just skim them, understand them. And if you sign, you commit not just to sales, but to respect, humility, and accountability. Her eyes swept the room again. If that's too much to ask, I'll understand, and I'll help you transition out. No one moved. Behind her, the lights of the showroom glinted off polished chrome, casting long reflections on the marble floor. It was a showroom designed to impress, but today, it had become a mirror. And every person in that room saw something they couldn't ignore anymore. Brielle exhaled, quietly. She didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't a feel-good moment. It was a reset. One that mattered more than any marketing campaign or annual bonus. And the message she left them with was simple. Never underestimate the quiet ones, she said. They might just own the building you're standing in. Then she turned and walked toward the glass doors, her sneakers echoing softly behind her. Outside, the Texas sky had shifted from gold to deep indigo. A new day waited on the other side of that night. So did the next chapter of Landry Prestige. And it would be written differently. The next morning, the showroom didn't hovered, quiet, tense, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see who would return. The lobby lights flickered on just after 7 a.m., an hour before opening, and Brielle was already the Renault disguise, no script, just herself, clean-cut blazer, simple heels. Hair down, focused. She stood beside a table near the center of the floor, where a stack of documents waited, each one a copy of the new Landry Standard. Not a corporate handbook, not a recycled HR memo, a contract. Clear, specific, human. Respect is the baseline, not the reward. We judge performance by service, not style. Pride in your work, humility in your presence. Every voice matters. Every customer matters. A few employees trickled in around 7:20. First was Maya, the youngest on the team. She looked shaken but curious. Then Eli, who had barely spoken yesterday but never joined in the break room laughter. Then Lanahair pulled back in a tighter bun than before, jaw clenched. No one spoke at first. They saw the table, the contracts, and Brielle, waiting. When Vince arrived at 7:41, he looked like a man who hadn't slept, which Brielle assumed was true. His shoulders were stiff, eyes bloodshot, and for once, he didn't try to command the room. More followed. Corey, Jules, Alyssa. From finance. Not everyone came back. Several desks remained empty. And that was fine. Brielle let the silence linger a little longer. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," she said. "I'm here because I believe people can choose who they want to be starting today." There was a shift in the air. Small, but real. In this business, image is powerful. But the moment we let it replace substance, we lose everything. That's what happened here. She held up a copy of the contract. "This isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. If you stay, it means you commit. If you sign, it means you'll be held accountable to each other, to every customer, and to the values this company was built on." She set the stack down. "Read it. Think about it. If you can't stand by it, I'll understand. There's no shame in walking away." She stepped back and waited. Maya was the first to move. Her hand trembled slightly, but she picked up a pen and signed. Then Eli. Then Jules. Lana approached slowly. She paused, then signed. Her mouth was a flat line, her eyes glassy. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. Even Vince stepped forward. He didn't look at Brielle when he signed, but he didn't look away from the words either. By 8:10 a.m., the pile of unsigned papers had thinned. The showroom was still quiet, but the energy had shifted. It wasn't comfortable, wasn't casual. It was honest. And that's what mattered. Brielle nodded once and took a slow breath. Now came the hard part. Accountability wasn't a speech. It was what happened the next time a customer walked through the door, the next time a colleague struggled, the next time someone judged a book by its cover. It had to be lived. At 9:02, the first customer arrived. A young couple, maybe early 30s, wearing worn jeans and secondhand sneakers. They walked in hesitantly, scanning the floor like they weren't sure they belonged. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lana stepped forward, not rushing, not forced. She offered a smile, asked if they wanted water, invited them to look at a few of the used SUVs. Her tone was soft, curious, professional. Brielle didn't interfere. She watched from a distance. It wasn't perfect. The words were a little stiff. The smile, tight. But it was genuine. A few minutes later, Corey joined her. He asked a question, actually listened to the answer, then offered to show them a model in the back lot. It was happening. Tiny signs, of course, correction. The kind that don't trend on social media or go viral overnight, but grow roots. Brielle thought about the industry reports she'd read earlier that month. Data showed companies with inclusive, respectful cultures had better retention, stronger customer loyalty, even higher revenue per square foot. Those metrics weren't just numbers, they were reflections of lived experience. And what happened at Landry Prestige wasn't unique. Workplace toxicity often started small, a joke, a shrug, a hiring bias no one challenged. But left unchecked, those cracks became structural. Brielle had seen what happened when people worked from fear instead of purpose. She had heard the silence that followed when no one felt safe to speak up, and she wasn't going to let her company become another case study. So she stayed visible. She didn't hide in her office or pass the baton. She checked in. She asked questions. She listened. Some moments still stung. A few employees resisted. A few clients walked out. But others stayed longer than before. They brought their families, referred friends, mentioned they'd heard things were different now. The transformation didn't look like fireworks. It looked like eye contact. It sounded like someone saying, "Can I help you find something?" and meaning it. Around week 2, Brielle noticed something new. Darius, the porter who had quietly wiped cars while everyone else ignored him, had started talking to customers. At first, just directing them. Then, answering questions. A week later, he made his first sale. She pulled him aside afterward. "You ever consider moving into sales?" Darius grinned. "Thought I wasn't polished enough." Brielle smiled back. "You're exactly what this place needs." By the end of the month, Darius had shadowed 3 top performers, 2 of whom had once ignored him completely. Now, they were asking for his input on clients. That's what change looked like. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fast. But it was happening. One decision at a time. One human moment at a time. That night, Brielle stood in the middle of the now quiet showroom. The floor gleamed. The lights dimmed. But the space didn't feel empty. It felt honest. And that was enough for now. She remembered something her grandfather once told her, back when she was still washing second-hand cars in summer heat. "Your name goes on that door, but your character fills the room." She ran her fingers across the edge of the nearest desk. For the first time in a long while, it felt like her company again. And it wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. The lot was quiet again. Golden hour light spilled across the hood of a freshly detailed SUV, its chrome trim glowing like a promise. Brielle stood just inside the glass doors, watching a father load 2 booster seats into the back of a used crossover. The same family that had walked in last week unsure if they belonged. Now they were laughing. Comfortable. Seen. That moment meant more to her than the $250,000 Escalade parked in the next bay. Because this wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about culture. About trust. About what a business stood for when no one was watching. The past few weeks had been a reckoning, not just for the team, but for Brielle too. She had always believed in hard work, resilience, and earning respect. But somewhere in the hustle of expansion, she'd stepped too far, back too confident that good intentions could protect her company from bad habits. They couldn't. And what she uncovered wasn't just bad behavior. It was a system built to reward sameness. A hierarchy shaped by surface judgments, where people who didn't look a certain way were overlooked, dismissed without a word. That wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. Left unchecked, it cost businesses more than just sales. It drove away good talent, hollowed out morale, created ripple effects no spreadsheet could measure. Disrespect didn't always show up in headlines. Sometimes it whispered through jokes in break rooms. Sometimes it rolled its eyes at a customer in work boots. And sometimes it sat in a corner office, scrolling past the rot. But Brielle wasn't going to let that be the story anymore. She remembered what her father used to say, what she hadn't fully understood until now. When you see a problem, don't wait. Crush it so it never comes back. So that's what she did. She didn't explode. She didn't shame. She exposed. Then rebuilt. With intention. With accountability. And most importantly, with room for people to grow. Because that's the part most people miss. True leadership isn't just calling out the problem. It's creating the conditions where the problem can't take root again. And as for those who judged, her called her forgettable, unqualified, or not our kind, they'll remember her now. Not for the cars she sold, but for the standard she set. The quiet one in jeans. The one who walked in invisible and left unshakable. Landry Prestige would never be perfect, but it would be better. Because sometimes the strongest message isn't shouted. It's lived. Every hour, every handshake, every customer who walks in and walks out feeling like they matter.